The alien instructor's tendrils slapped against the hollow slate with a sticky thwack that echoed through the cavernous lecture hall. "Class," it gurgled, its throat sacs inflating like a bagpipe. "Today's exercise will test not your memorization, but your survival." The murmur that swept the room was immediate. Younglings from 7 different species whispered nervously, their scales, feathers, or chitin glimmering in the bright overhead lights. In the middle of the noise, sitting slouched in his chair and balancing a stylus on his upper lip like it was a circus act, was Jason Cooper, the lone human exchange student. His shirt was untucked, his boots muddy, and his eyes half-lidded with boredom. "Survival," he muttered to himself. "That word's got our name on it." The instructor, known as Scholar-Designate Rilthok, waved a spindly appendage toward the massive simulation chamber sealed behind reinforced glass. The doors hissed open with a deep hydraulic groan, releasing a blast of cool, recycled air. "Each of you will construct a shelter before the next planetary cycle ends. You will receive only the raw materials native to the environment we simulate. No technology. No prefabricated shelters. No aid." Its voice grew sharper, punctuated with a snap of mandibles. "The purpose, to determine which minds adapt, and which fail." The alien students leaned forward. For them, this wasn't a surprise. Every cadet of the Interstellar Academy knew about the survival course. It was infamous, a trial that stripped away comfort and forced cadets to rely only on instinct. For Jason, though? He perked up like someone had just asked if he wanted to go camping. A tall, insectoid cadet with iridescent green wings raised one claw. "Designate Rilthok, what is considered sufficient shelter?" "Enough," Rilthok replied. "To protect you from environmental hazards, to provide rest, and to resist collapse under stress." Jason raised his hand lazily, still balancing the stylus. "Do we get points for style?" The entire lecture hall froze. Students turned their heads slowly, as if they couldn't believe the audacity. Even the instructor's eyes, 2 lidless orbs like floating pools of oil, blinked in what might have been disbelief. "Style?" Rilthok repeated, its throat sacs wheezing. Jason sat up, stretched, and let the stylus fall. "Yeah, you know, like aesthetics. You want 4 walls and a roof? Fine. But what if I put in, say, a fireplace? Maybe a rocking chair? Hell, I'll throw in a garden out back." A ripple of chittering laughter broke out among the alien cadets. Not kind laughter, mockery. To them, humans were still a novelty, a primitive species that the Academy had admitted on trial basis. They expected Jason to fail, to stumble, to make mistakes that would confirm their assumptions. The idea that a human could joke about survival was unthinkable. Rilthok slammed its appendage on the podium again. "You will take this seriously, human?" "Oh, I am," Jason said, grinning like he was already in on a joke the rest of them hadn't caught up to yet. The simulation chamber hummed to life as the students were directed inside. The walls shimmered with projected landscapes, loading into place with dazzling speed until the interior became a wide stretch of alien forest. Towering trees with purple bark reached high into an artificial sky, while a carpet of moss glowed faintly underfoot. Strange calls of simulation-coded wildlife echoed from the canopy. Each cadet was deposited at a distance from one another, a neat trick to prevent collaboration. Jason found himself standing beside a pile of rough logs, scattered stones, and some fibrous plants. He rubbed his hands together. "All right. Day 1 at summer camp." Far across the chamber, an aquatic-blooded alien named Vrel slumped her gelatinous body against a log and groaned. "What am I supposed to do with this? We build domes of water back home, not huts," she sneered, her voice carrying across the clearing. "And the human thinks he will make a garden? Laughable." Jason ignored her, whistling softly as he picked up the nearest log. To him, this wasn't punishment, it was play. Growing up in a small Midwestern town, his childhood had been filled with camping trips, scout projects, and weekends spent cobbling together makeshift forts out of whatever materials were lying around. By 12, he could split firewood. By 15, he could patch a roof with duct tape and tar paper. And by the time he shipped off to the academy, he knew one universal truth: you could build a home anywhere if you had the right mindset. He hefted a stone, tested its weight, then grabbed another. Hammer, check. Chisel, check. All right, let's do this. Within an hour, most of the alien cadets were already exhausted. The insectoid with wings buzzed nervously as he tried to lash together tree branches, but the knots slipped apart. The aquatic Vrel sulked and flopped slime over a rock, mumbling about unfair conditions. A furred cadet dug shallow holes in the moss but got distracted whenever a simulated creature scurried past. Jason, on the other hand, had stripped bark to make cordage, used stones to shape crude tools, and stacked logs into the beginnings of a lean-to. By midday, smoke rose above his plot. He had fire. Real, crackling fire, flames licking against carefully stacked tinder and feeding off split logs. From across the chamber, jaws dropped. Fire wasn't forbidden, but most cadets didn't even consider it. They didn't know how. On their worlds, technology had supplanted the skill, or their species evolved without the need. Yet here was Jason, sitting cross-legged by a crackling blaze, humming tunelessly as though he were back on Earth roasting marshmallows. Vrel shouted at him. "You waste time! Shelter, not burning sticks!" Jason leaned back, hands behind his head. "Fire is shelter. Keeps you warm. Keeps predators away. Lets you cook food. Hell, it's cozy." By the time the first artificial night settled, shadows deepening and cold winds sweeping through the chamber, half the cadets had nothing more than poorly stacked branches or mounds of moss. Jason had a triangular hut supported by stone wedges, smoke wafting from a vent he'd carved at the top, and embers glowing softly inside. Then, to the utter shock of everyone watching from the observation deck, he started digging a shallow pit beside his lean-to. He lined it with stones, packed it with soil, and began planting cuttings from fibrous plants he'd collected earlier. A garden. The aliens watching couldn't believe their eyes. "Is he cultivating?" whispered one. "He is wasting precious energy," another scoffed. Rilthok, however, leaned closer to the glass, throat sacs pulsing in thought. The human's behavior was reckless, but undeniably resourceful. Inside the simulation, Jason wiped sweat from his brow, sat back, and admired his progress. Fireplace? Check. Tools? Check. Garden? Check. He yawned, stretched, and muttered, "Not bad for day one." Curling up inside his warm little hut, he fell asleep to the sound of the fire crackling, a smug smile on his face. The next morning, the other cadets woke shivering, hungry, and miserable. Jason woke to the smell of roasted tubers he had dug from beneath the moss, wrapped in leaves, and cooked in the coals. He strolled out of his hut holding one, steam rising from the split flesh. He waved casually at Vrel, who looked like she had barely survived the night. "Morning. Breakfast?" Her gelatinous body quivered with outrage. "You mock us!" Jason shrugged. "Nope. Just sharing the wealth." He tossed the roasted tuber to a nearby cadet who hadn't eaten since the trial began. The cadet sniffed it, tasted it, then devoured it greedily. And just like that, a shift began. The students had entered expecting to outshine the primitive human. Instead, the human had a warm hut, a fire, tools, a garden, and now, food. By morning of the second cycle, Jason wasn't the laughingstock anymore. He was the standard everyone else compared themselves to. Which was exactly why more than one of them started plotting how to take what he had built. By the second cycle, the simulation chamber smelled of damp moss, scorched wood, and desperation. Most of the cadets had tried to mimic Jason's methods, but none of them had the patience, or frankly, the stubborn streak to pull it off. A few managed to scrape together passable huts of piled branches, but they lacked fire, tools, or food. The insectoid with shimmering wings tried to copy Jason's log stacking but forgot to wedge the base with stones, and by morning his shelter had collapsed, pinning one wing painfully beneath it. Vrel, refusing to beg for knowledge from a human, spent the night huddled in a crude slime cocoon that did nothing to shield her from the cold drafts. Jason, on the other hand, stepped out of his hut yawning, stretching his arms like he was waking up on a Sunday back home. A faint column of smoke rose from his fireplace, and the earthy smell of roasted roots clung to the air. He had slept deeply, stomach full, body warm, and mind clear. As he looked around at his struggling classmates, his grin widened. "Rough night, huh?" he said cheerfully, breaking a tuber in half and letting steam curl into the morning light. The insect had groaned, clutching its bent wing. Vrel just glared at him with such intensity her gelatinous form quivered. Others avoided eye contact, shame painted across their alien features. Jason felt a pang of sympathy. He wasn't cruel. But he also wasn't going to pretend survival was easy. He walked over to the insected, crouched down, and examined the crumpled shelter. "See, your base gave out because you didn't anchor the logs. Weight distribution. Think triangles, not rectangles." He demonstrated with a few sticks. The insected's compound eyes glittered with reluctant interest. "And as for the wing, don't baby it. Move it. Keep circulation flowing." The cadet hissed but followed his advice. Jason stood, brushing moss from his pants. He was about to head back when he noticed Vrel trudging toward his hut, dragging something behind her. When she reached him, she dropped a pile of damp moss and a few oddly shaped stones at his feet. "I bring you tribute," she announced sourly. Jason raised an eyebrow. "Tribute? You share your fire knowledge. I give supplies. This is fair exchange." It was her pride talking. She couldn't admit she needed help. Jason scratched his chin. The idea of becoming the class's unofficial camp counselor amused him. "All right, deal. But don't just watch, work. You want fire? I'll teach you friction methods." He pulled out 2 dry sticks he had prepared the day before, crouched, and began rubbing them together. Sparks of heat formed, smoke rising. Vrel leaned close, her gelatinous form rippling in disbelief. By the end of the hour, a flickering flame licked at the moss pile, and Vrel hissed triumphantly. "I control fire!" she shouted, loud enough for the whole chamber to hear. Jason shook his head, smirking. "Fire controls you if you're careless. Remember that." News spread quickly. Soon, a few cadets gathered around Jason's hut, offering scraps of stone, bark, or plant fiber in exchange for his advice. He didn't mind. Teaching them reminded him of camping trips back home with younger scouts who thought striking flint was black magic. Besides, the work kept him busy, and the gratitude, however grudging, was better than constant glares. But not everyone liked the shift in dynamic. That night, while the simulation moon hung pale and high, Jason woke to the sound of footsteps crunching moss outside his hut. His fire crackled low, throwing shadows across the walls. He sat up quietly, hand reaching instinctively for the stone axe he had fashioned earlier. The footsteps circled, hesitant but deliberate. Then, scraping at the hut's entrance. Someone was trying to sneak in. Jason slid silently to the side, crouched low, and waited. The flap of bark and fiber rustled open, and a silhouette ducked inside. Jason lunged, pinning the intruder with the haft of his axe pressed to their chest. "Whoa, whoa!" hissed a panicked voice. "Don't kill me!" Jason narrowed his eyes. It was the furred cadet, small and twitchy, who had barely managed to dig a den for himself. His wide amber eyes glimmered with fear. "What the hell are you doing in my hut?" Jason demanded in a low growl. The cadet squirmed. I was cold. Hungry. Your fire looked warm. Please, human, I just wanted to sit by it." Jason studied him. The desperation was real, not malicious. He sighed and lowered the axe. "You could have just asked?" The cadet's ears drooped. "No one asks humans for help." Jason shook his head, tossed him a half-roasted tuber, and pointed to the corner. "Fine. Sit. But you help chop wood tomorrow." The cadet nodded eagerly, gnawing on the food like a starving dog. By morning, however, the theft attempt became public. Rumors twisted it into something darker, that Jason hoarded too much, that others needed what he had, that maybe it would be better to just take it. Jason felt the mood shift. Whispers turned to stares, stares to glares. Even the ones he had helped avoided him, fearful of being accused of favoritism. He tried to brush it off, focusing instead on expanding his hut. He built a second fire pit outside, started crafting stone-tipped stakes to fortify the walls, and lined his garden with makeshift irrigation channels carved from split logs. It was overkill, maybe, but he knew the feeling of being targeted. Growing up with older cousins had taught him one golden rule: if they're gonna mess with you, you better make it clear you're not worth messing with. On the third night, the attack came. This time it wasn't a desperate cadet sneaking in. It was 3 of them, banded together. Jason woke to the sound of logs shifting and his garden being trampled. He bolted upright, grabbed his axe, and burst outside to find Vrel and 2 others kicking through his carefully stacked supplies. His heart thudded. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted. Vrel whirled, firelight glinting off her gelatinous form. "You hoard resources, human! You shame us with your arrogance. We take what you have earned, and balance is restored." Jason gritted his teeth. "You want to survive, you work for it. Stealing won't keep you alive." One of the others lunged at him with a sharpened stick. Jason sidestepped, swung the blunt side of his axe, and knocked the cadet sprawling. The second charged, claws flashing, but Jason ducked, rolled, and came up swinging again, this time cracking the attacker across the shoulder. Vrel shrieked and hurled a glob of acidic slime. Jason dove aside just in time. The glob hissed as it ate into the log wall of his hut, smoke rising from the sizzling wood. Rage flared in his chest. They weren't just stealing now. They were destroying. With a roar, Jason charged. He slammed into Vrel, knocking her backward. She writhed, trying to engulf him, but he shoved the haft of his axe between them, forcing her back with sheer strength. "You think this is survival?" he bellowed. "This is just cowardice." The commotion drew other cadets, who gathered in a loose circle, watching wide-eyed as the fight raged. Some shouted encouragement, others whispered fearfully. Finally, Jason shoved Vrel hard enough that she stumbled, oozing into a heap. He stood over her, chest heaving, sweat pouring down his brow. "I don't care what you think of me. But if you try to burn down what I've built, I'll fight you every damn time." The chamber fell silent. The only sound was the crackle of fire, and the hiss of Vrel's simmering slime. For the first time since the trial began, none of the aliens laughed at him. They looked at him with something different now, something closer to respect, or perhaps fear. Jason turned away, began repairing the damage to his hut, and muttered just loud enough for them to hear. "Survival isn't about taking. It's about building." But as he worked into the night, sweat soaking his shirt, he knew one thing for sure: the real test hadn't even started yet. The environment itself had been mild so far. The academy wouldn't let it stay that way. If the cadets didn't break him, the simulation would. And Jason Cooper was determined to be ready. The forest didn't stay peaceful for long. On the 4th cycle, the environment changed. The cadets awoke to the sound of a deep mechanical rumble shaking the chamber, as if the very ground beneath them had come alive. The sky overhead flickered, simulation code reconfiguring into a storm front of roiling black clouds. Lightning tore across the horizon, illuminating jagged purple trees, and a chilling wind cut through the mossy floor. Jason knew immediately the academy was upping the stakes. The cadets panicked. Some scrambled to reinforce their shelters with sloppy additions, stacking wet logs or hurling moss against weak spots. Others simply froze, huddling together and praying the storm would pass. Jason didn't freeze. He bolted outside, hair whipping in the sudden gale, and scanned the sky. The air carried the metallic tang of ozone. The storm wasn't just for show. It was designed to test structural integrity, endurance, and nerve. He shouted to the others over the roar of thunder. "Get low! Anchor your shelters! Use rocks, weight them down!" Some listened. Most didn't. Fear was louder than reason. Jason sprinted back to his hut, muscles burning. He jammed stones against the base of his walls, tightened lashings of bark cordage, and covered his small garden with slabs of bark to keep the soil from washing away. The wind howled like a banshee, and his fire guttered low, embers glowing weakly. He dragged heavy logs to shield it, creating a crude windbreak. Every second counted. Then the rain began. Not soft rain. Sheets of water poured from the artificial sky as if the heavens had cracked open. In an instant, Cadet's flimsy shelters sagged, collapsed, or washed away entirely. Screams cut through the storm. One insected cadet flailed helplessly, wings soaked and useless, his shelter already reduced to splinters. The furred cadet Jason had taken and scrambled for cover, eyes wide with terror. Jason's hut creaked under the pressure but held. He ducked inside, water dripping from his hair, and cursed under his breath. He couldn't just sit there. He grabbed his axe, lashed a bark shield to his arm, and plunged back into the storm. The first cadet he reached was half buried under a collapsed heap of logs. Jason dropped his axe, braced himself, and hauled the timber aside with a grunt. His muscles screamed, mud sucking at his boots, but the logs gave way. He dragged the insected free and shoved him toward his hut. "Move! Get inside, now!" The cadet hesitated, trembling. Jason roared above the wind. "Go!" Finally, the insectoid stumbled toward safety. Jason turned and scanned for the next. Through the sheets of rain, he saw Vrel struggling, her gelatinous body losing cohesion as water diluted her slime. She writhed helplessly, trying to crawl toward a half-collapsed shelter that was already crumbling. For a split second, Jason considered leaving her. She had tried to destroy his work, humiliate him, even harm him. But survival wasn't about grudges. He slogged through the mud, reached her side, and shouted, "Hang on!" She sputtered, acid hissing weakly from her form. Jason grabbed a split log, jammed it under her bulk, and levered her upward with a primal roar. Slowly, painfully, he dragged her onto higher ground and pointed toward his hut. "You'll melt out here. Move!" She stared at him, disbelief shining in her black eyes, but she obeyed, slithering weakly in the direction he'd pointed. One by one, Jason pulled them in, injured, soaked, terrified cadets who had nothing left. His hut became a beacon in the storm, a patch of flickering firelight in a sea of darkness. They piled inside, dripping and shivering, huddling together for warmth. The smell was awful, wet fur, damp slime, singed chitin, but no one complained. When the last cadet staggered in, Jason slammed the entrance shut and dropped heavily by the fire, chest heaving, lungs burning. His body ached from exertion, his hands raw, but he looked around at the circle of wide alien eyes and managed a grin. "Not bad for a morning jog." A nervous laugh rippled through the group. Even Vrel cracked a weak hiss that might have been amusement. But the storm wasn't done. The hut shuddered as a fresh blast of wind slammed into it. Logs groaned, lashings strained, and water seeped through cracks. Jason shot to his feet. "Brace the walls! Everyone push!" The cadets scrambled to obey. Wings, claws, tendrils, paws, every alien form pressed against the walls, holding them upright. Jason planted his back against the largest log beam, teeth gritted. Thunder boomed overhead, lightning split the sky, and the hut rattled as if the storm wanted to tear it apart. "Don't you give out on me!" Jason growled through clenched teeth. He pressed harder, muscles trembling. "Not today!" Minutes stretched into eternity. The storm raged, battering them with relentless force. Cadets whimpered, muttered prayers, hissed curses. Jason refused to yield. Sweat mingled with rain on his face, his breath ragged, his body screaming for rest. But he held. Finally, mercifully, the storm began to break. The rain slowed to a drizzle, the thunder faded into distant rumbles, and the wind died down. Weak light filtered through the clouds. The hut still stood. Inside, cadets collapsed onto the mossy floor, gasping with relief. Jason slid down against the wall, chest heaving, arms limp at his sides. He felt like every muscle in his body had been torn in half. But when he looked around at the survivors, huddled in the firelight, he smiled. They were alive. For the first time since the trial began, The cadets looked at him not with scorn, or envy, or fear, but with genuine respect. Even gratitude. One of them, the insectoid with the broken wing, rasped, "Why? Why save us, after we mocked you? After we tried to take what you built?" Jason shrugged, exhaustion heavy in his bones. "Because survival isn't just about me. It's about all of us. You think a storm cares about your pride? About your species? About who's stronger or smarter? No. It just comes, and it crushes anyone who isn't ready. We either stand together, or we fall alone." Silence filled the hut. His words sank deeper than any lecture the Academy had ever given. But then, just as the cadets began to relax, a low growl echoed outside. Every head snapped toward the sound. Jason's stomach sank. He knew that sound. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't wind. The Academy hadn't just coded a storm into the simulation. They had unleashed predators to strike while the cadets were at their weakest. The growl came again, deeper this time, followed by the crunch of heavy footsteps. The firelight flickered, shadows stretching long across the hut. Jason grabbed his axe, pushed himself to his feet despite the ache in his muscles, and narrowed his eyes. "Stay here," he told the others. "This part's mine." He stepped outside into the drizzle, mud squelching beneath his boots. Lightning flickered overhead, illuminating the massive shape prowling just beyond the tree-ling. Its eyes glowed yellow in the dark, teeth glinting like knives. The creature was a predator built for terror, 6 legs, a body like a panther crossed with a bear, and claws that gouged deep furrows into the ground. Jason tightened his grip on the axe. His body screamed at him to run, to hide, to collapse and let someone else deal with it. But there was no one else. He was the only one standing between the cadets and the beast. "All right," he muttered, rolling his shoulders. "Let's dance." The predator roared and charged. The predator barreled through the mud like a living avalanche, its 6 claws ripping deep furrows into the ground, eyes glowing with predatory hunger. Rain slicked off its black hide as it lunged, maw opening wide enough to snap Jason in half. Jason's instinct screamed, but he didn't flinch. He wasn't faster than it. He wasn't stronger. But he was human, and humans had learned long ago that survival wasn't about matching nature blow for blow. It was about turning the environment itself into a weapon. At the last possible moment, he dove sideways, rolling through the mud. The predator thundered past him, jaws snapping shut with a bone-shaking crunch. Jason sprang up, axe raised, and shouted over the storm's lingering echoes. "Come on, ugly! You want dinner? You're gonna have to work for it." The beast wheeled around, muscles rippling beneath its glistening hide, and charged again. Jason sprinted back toward the hut, every step splashing mud. Inside, the cadets screamed warnings. "Human! You cannot fight it! You will be torn apart!" Jason ignored them. He wasn't planning to fight it head-on. He sprinted past his hut toward the fire pit he had built outside. The flames had nearly died, but embers still glowed faintly under the wet ash. Jason skidded to his knees, grabbed a half-charred log, and blew furiously, feeding it with breath until sparks flared. The log caught, flame licking up through the rain. The predator leapt. Jason whirled, thrusting the flaming log upward. The beast recoiled mid-pounce, slamming into the ground just short of him, snarling as firelight reflected in its furious eyes. "That's right," Jason muttered, panting. "Fire's older than you." The creature circled, muscles taut, uncertain. Jason backed toward the hut, brandishing the log in one hand and his axe in the other. He shouted to the cadets inside. "Now's your chance! Get out here!" There was a stunned pause. Then the insectoid cadet stumbled out, wings dragging. The furred one followed, ears flat against his skull. One by one, the others emerged, trembling but alive. They formed a ragged semicircle behind Jason, their fear battling with something new, determination. Jason's voice was hoarse but steady. "You've all got claws, fangs, acid, whatever. Stop waiting for someone else to save you. Help me drive it back." The predator snarled, pacing, testing the ground with its claws. Then it lunged again. This time, Jason didn't meet it alone. The insective lashed its wings, buzzing up to claw at the beast's eyes. The furred cadet darted low, slashing at its legs. Vrel spat a jet of acid, sizzling against the predator's flank and making it howl in rage. Others joined in, throwing stones, stabbing with sharpened sticks, shrieking war cries and voices that had once mocked Jason. Jason charged with them, swinging his axe with every ounce of strength left in his body. The blade bit into the predator's shoulder, sending up a spray of dark fluid. The creature reared, howling, snapping its massive jaws. Jason ducked, rolled beneath it, and jammed the burning log into its underside. The smell of scorched flesh filled the air. The predator screeched and bolted backward, thrashing wildly. "Push it!" Jason roared. "Drive it out!" Together, a ragtag band of half-starved, rain-soaked cadets surged forward, pelting it with whatever they had. Acid hissed, claws raked, sticks stabbed, voices screamed. Overwhelmed, the predator stumbled, turned, and with one last furious roar, fled into the simulation's trees. Silence fell. Jason collapsed to his knees in the mud, gasping for breath. The log slipped from his hand, extinguished in the wet earth. Every muscle in his body trembled. He had nothing left. But as he raised his head, he saw the cadet staring at him, not with fear, not with mockery, but with awe. Vrel slithered forward, her voice uncharacteristically quiet. You saved us. Not just once. Again and again." Jason gave a weak laugh, dragging the axe into his lap. "Nah. We saved ourselves. Took you long enough to figure that out." The insectoid bowed his head, antennae quivering. "We mocked you for boasting of your garden and fireplace. But it was your methods that kept us alive. You saw survival as more than endurance. You saw it as living." Jason smirked tiredly. "Well, where I'm from, if you're gonna suffer, you might as well be comfortable while doing it. Hot food. Warm fire. Shelter that doesn't leak. Maybe even some flowers in the yard." A ripple of exhausted laughter passed through the group. Even in the aftermath of terror, Jason's humor broke the tension like sunlight through clouds. Moments later, the simulation chamber shimmered. The storm clouds faded, the predator dissolved into lines of light, and the alien forest peeled away into the sterile white of the Academy's testing hall. The trial was over. Scholar-designate Rilthok descended from the observation deck, tendrils curling in visible astonishment. Its throat sac swelled, deflated, swelled again as though it couldn't process what it had just witnessed. "Never," it croaked. "In my years overseeing this program, has a cadet transformed the exercise so thoroughly." Its lidless eyes swept the cadets. "You were meant to compete. Yet you—" It pointed a trembling appendage at Jason. "Forced cooperation through example. You built not only shelter, but community." Jason rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed by the attention. I just didn't feel like dying alone." Rilthok turned to the other cadets. "And you, once disdainful, now united. Will you deny the truth of what occurred?" No one spoke. The silence was answer enough. Rilthok's tendrils writhed in thought. Finally, it addressed Jason directly. "Human, your methods were unorthodox. Your humor disruptive. Your arrogance grating. Yet your results are undeniable. You succeeded where others floundered. You forced even predators of simulation to yield." Jason shrugged. "Guess I passed then?" The instructor's throat sacs wheezed with something halfway between a sigh and a chuckle. "You did more than pass. You redefined the lesson." As the cadets were dismissed, Jason lingered behind, stretching sore muscles and watching the others shuffle out. Many glanced back at him, not with disdain anymore, but with nods of acknowledgement. Respect. Even gratitude. Vrel slithered up beside him, her black eyes fixed on the floor. "Human," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I thought your talk of gardens and fireplaces was arrogance. Now I see it was vision." Jason grinned and clapped her gelatinous shoulder, his hand squelching slightly. "Don't sweat it. You're not the first to underestimate a human. Won't be the last. She tilted her head. Why? Why do you laugh, even in danger? Why do you build comfort in a test meant only for survival? Jason looked up at the vast academy ceiling, where simulation projectors hummed faintly. He thought of his hometown, of camping trips with his father, of firelight dancing on nights that could have been cold and miserable but weren't, because humans refuse to let misery be the end of the story. Because that's what we do, he said softly. Then he smirked again. Besides, who wants to survive in a hut with no fireplace? That's just depressing. Vrel stared at him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she hissed with laughter. Jason walked away whistling, hands in his pockets, as if the last few days hadn't nearly killed him. But the others followed him with their eyes, and in the quiet hallways of the academy, whispers began to spread. The human hadn't just passed the survival trial. He had changed it forever. And somewhere, deep in the galaxy, survival instructors were about to have a very serious problem, because now every cadet who had shared that hut in the storm would be asking one question their species had never asked before. Why settle for surviving, when you could live?